Listen properly.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another pot-stirring episode of the Futsak Files. Once more, we open the case file no one wants to talk about, but everyone needs to hear. When Hamas attacked Israel, the world was caught off guard, or so we were told. But what if one country, far away at the tip of Africa, wasn't caught off guard at all? Before we get into this explosive episode and before we hand out today's Empty Skull Award, let me remind you that something big is coming up on the 1st of November. An expose that's not just shocking, it's genuinely useful, and you'll walk away smarter for it, especially if you're planning on buying a pre-owned car anytime soon. Now then, it's time to award the Empty Skull Award to the biggest empty skull who has truly outdone themselves in recent events. So, without further ado, the Empty Skull Award goes to none other than Panyaza Lesufi. Because brilliance clearly took the day off, Winnie decided to launch an illegal traffic warden force. A vanity project so doomed that it collapsed under its own political arrogance. Instead of fixing Gauteng's broken roads, collapsing infrastructure, or sky-high crime rate, the Sufi thought the answer was to dress untrained idiots in uniform and call it law enforcement. Never mind that the program was unconstitutional, unauthorized, and flat out illegal. It still burned through millions in taxpayers' money. Just look at these shiny new BMWs these idiots were driving, all the while doing nothing to make anyone safer. Now, that's not leadership. Congratulations, Panyaza Lesufi, a worthy recipient of the Empty Skull Award. Now, with that out of the way, before we dive into the comments I want to highlight, let me quickly tell you about the two books I've written. The first one's Fragile, released in October 2023. The second, DS Special Agent Hunter McCallum, released exactly a year later in October 2024. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because from now on, I'm going to play you a short excerpt from one of these two books in every single episode. Why? Simple. I want to leave you drooling for more. And yes, I also want to sell some digital copies. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But here's the catch. Every cent from those book sales goes straight to a cause that actually matters. The Feral Cat charity that I've been raising funds for. So, if you enjoy the chaos, the stories, and the pot stirring, you can grab a copy, knowing your money is going to go to feed hungry little furballs who depend on human compassion to survive. And before we move on, I also want to let you know that I'm busy building a proper website. It's going to be the Futsak Files store. That's where you'll soon be able to grab official merchandise like baseball caps, t-shirts, and of course, digital copies of my two books. But, and here's the old school part, the site's still under construction. So, for now, I'm going to do it the old way. The way we used to do things before online stores took over. So if you're interested in getting a digital copy of either book, just drop me an email at author.skulk@gmail.com. You'll find it in the comment section below. Tell me which book you'd like, and I'll send you the banking details for an EFT. Yes, I know. Very old school, but hey, it still works. And it's just a temporary plan until the new website goes live. Now, here's the sweet part. For my loyal viewers only, I'm making digital copies available for just 75 Rand each, or 125 Rand for both. Yes, you heard that right. That's a full 200 Rand less than what they individuals sell for in bookstores, and a massive 400 Rand less for what they sell for together. If that's not a giveaway, okay, here's the guy that's going to help me sell the pitch. If that's not a giveaway, um, I honestly don't know what is. And remember, every cent goes towards a worthy cause. All right, sales pitch over. I hope Mario helped with my pitch. Now let me spoil you with the promised excerpt before I highlight some of the interesting comments you posted.
As I pull back the covers of the unmade bed, I notice she has left her t-shirt behind. I catch a whiff of a scent that instantly brings her to mind, pressing it gently against my nose and closing my eyes, as if she's still right there in the room with me. The aroma is almost enchanting, lulling me to sleep with it nestled beside my pillow. When I wake, Jacqueline's sweet fragrance still lingers in the room. I decide to call her, and perhaps drop off the t-shirt on my way to the office. I call her number, but it rings until voicemail picks up. I figure she must still be sleeping and decide to try again later. Just as I get ready to leave for work, she calls back, and I immediately answer the phone. I stop time. So you decided to talk to me after all, I tease, expecting her sweet voice. But what I hear is a man's voice instead.
Who am I speaking with?
Who are you, and why do you have Jacqueline's phone? I demand.
This is Detective Sergeant Botha. I'm investigating the murder of the person who owns this phone.
I'm instantly paralyzed, the detective's words hitting me like a wrecking ball. The phone feels heavy in my trembling hand as my chest tightens, each breath a struggle against the suffocating weight of sorrow. The reality of her death crashes over me, dark, final, dragging me into a depth I fear I'll never escape.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that and are already emailing me your order. Now, I want to thank you for the great response on the last episode. I've picked a few comments to highlight here before we get started. First of all, Christine Hiller said, Derek Chauvin got a South African trial. Simple. And why doesn't Trump just pardon Derek Chauvin? Well, Christine, Trump can pardon Derek Chauvin. He has the authority to do so. But it's important to remember that such a pardon would only apply to the federal charges. The state charges, believe it or not, are beyond his reach, even as president. And the governor of Minnesota, as I've said in a previous episode, is a leftist socialist, so the chances of him ever pardoning Chauvin are absolutely zero. H3HU G7SP1 interestingly said, having watched the full-length video of Chauvin's body-worn camera back then, I got the sense that Officer Chauvin was extremely patient with Floyd, going above and beyond what is necessary for an officer of the law to have to put up with. At one stage, he had Floyd in the police vehicle, took him out of the vehicle again since Floyd had trouble breathing, and he tried hard to accommodate a common thug. And to top it all off, during the trial, the officials outright lied about the knee over the neck technique being taught to police officers. It was a sham trial. Other half said, social pressure. Chauvin was doing his job, upholding the law. Well, I can't argue with that. Haven't seen this episode yet? You've got to check it out. It's really an interesting one. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. The link's waiting for you at the end of this episode. All right, that's as far as the comments go for today. Please remember, I read every single one, and I really appreciate you taking your precious time to share your thoughts. So please keep them coming. Now, at last you may say, let's get to today's subject. On 7 October 2023, Hamas launched one of the most barbaric attacks on Israel in recent memory. But what if behind the headlines lies a question not yet fully answered? Did South Africa know about it beforehand? So we'll dig into the publicly reported facts, the connections, and the puzzling diplomatic signals. And we ask, is it probable that South Africa was aware or even complicit in the lead up to the attack? Now, listen properly. There's a $400 million That's 7 billion rand. Lawsuit being prepared in the United States against Ramaphosa. And if it proceeds, the fallout will be explosive. At the center of it are accusations that the South African government knowingly collaborated with Hamas ahead of the October 7 attacks on Israel. Attacks in which at least 47 American citizens were killed or taken hostage. Now I ask you, if American victims' families believe they have a strong enough case to prove the South African government knew beforehand of the Hamas attack, what does that tell you? The case claims to have uncovered new material evidence of coordination between South African officials, Hamas, and Iran in the months leading up to the massacre. It's a staggering allegation that South Africa's diplomatic support for Hamas wasn't just rhetorical solidarity, but active complicity. Remember, the Promoting Security and Justice for Victims of Terrorism Act of 2019 allows American victims to sue foreign governments or individuals shown to have materially supported terrorist organizations, even overriding sovereign immunity. Plaintiffs intend to argue that South African officials either had prior knowledge of or directly facilitated Hamas operations. So unless Ramaphosa can prove he had no knowledge, he may personally be liable for damages. That bold possibility is what we will be tackling today. We'll walk through the evidence, the relationships, the diplomatic moves, and you decide. On 7 October 2023, Hamas launched one of the most barbaric attacks on Israel in recent memory. Just the fact that there were hostages at all once again proves that the savages the South African government is in bed with are proven terrorists. Just like the ANC once was, but considering their close alignment with Hamas, maybe I should not be referring to their status as terrorists in the past tense. Intelligence analysts scrambled to explain how Israel was caught so off guard. I also couldn't understand how a band of murderous savages managed to achieve the success they did against a formidable nation like Israel. Had they just responded faster, they would probably have been able to mow down every single raghead with an AK-47 that dared to step onto Holy Land soil to commit their savage acts. So, given the scale and coordination of the attack, many have asked, how did Hamas manage to pull this off? Was it truly a surprise from the outside, or did their sworn allies, including South Africa, know more than they admitted? South Africa's warm relationship with Hamas and the Palestinian cause is undeniable when you look at South Africa's diplomatic posture. The ANC government has long drawn parallels between its own anti-apartheid struggle and the Palestinian struggle, often unashamedly labeling Israel as an apartheid state. South Africa has positioned itself as the staunchest supporter of Palestine and, of course, adversary of Israel. In 2022, for example, the Jerusalem Post reported that South African Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor, stirred outrage with her pro-Palestinian remarks wrapped in a keffiyeh. In May 2024, Hamas propaganda and materials were openly distributed at the conference in South Africa, which celebrated Hamas's October 7 attack. Just let that sink in. South Africa celebrated the blatant massacre of innocent Israeli men, women, boys, girls, and even babies that lay helplessly in their cribs. That is the kind of filthy garbage the South African government proudly associates itself with. Their actions on the world stage just reiterated their terrorist roots, like recalling the ambassador to South Africa, leveling genocide accusations against Israel at the ICJ, and treating the Hamas-Israeli war through a very strong partisan lens, rather than the neutral position these empty skulls always claim to have. They must think the rest of the world are as stupid as they are to believe that. This relationship with Hamas and their immoral behavior proves that South Africa doesn't even qualify as a neutral bystander in this conflict. Now, let's zoom in on specific incidents and signals that strengthen the belief that they knew that the attack was going to happen. First of all, South Africa has made it very clear that they basically consider Israel as an enemy. These knuckleheads are so stupid, spewing their hatred of Israel even though they know it's America's closest ally. I mean, how brain dead, idiotically stupid can you be? If I were them, I would maybe mute my big mouth, especially considering that Israel has taught much larger foes like Iran painful lessons without even breaking a sweat. And they somewhat taught them simultaneously. These idiots had paid attention at school in history class. They'd also remember the Six-Day War of 1967, when Israel crushed multiple Arab armies in less than a week. Well, on the other hand, I forgot most of them never had history as a subject, or attended school. That probably explains it. And then, Jabba's most brain-dead move. Just 10 days after the October 7 attack, while Israel was still collecting its dead, Pandor held a phone call with Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. Well, little knowing then that Haniyeh had only 9 months left alive before he would have his long-awaited orgy with 72 virgins. In more clear language, before Israel relieved the world of another oxygen-stealing savage. Needless to say, Pandor was devastated when she learned of her terrorist bud's extermination by Israel in Tehran on 31 July 2024. And he was one of no less than 9 senior Hamas terrorists that Israel took out since October 7, 2023. Just have a look at this list of savages that have been exterminated. Ahmed Al-Gandor, North Gaza Brigade Commander, killed during fighting on November 26, 2023. Saleh Al-Arori, Hamas Deputy Political Chief, killed by a strike in Beirut on the 2nd of January 2024. Marwan Issa, Deputy Military Commander, he was the number 2 in the Qassam Brigades, killed during a strike on March the 10th, 2024. Mohammed Deif, military commander and October 7 mastermind, one of the biggest terrorists, killed on the 13th of July, 2024. Another big fish, Yahya Sinwar, was the Hamas leader in Gaza, killed in an Israeli operation on the 17th of October, 2024. Mohammed Sinwar, Gaza military chief and brother of Yahya, killed in a strike on the 13th of May 2025. Ayman Nofal, Central Gaza Brigade commander, killed on 17 October 2023. And Ibrahim Biari, commander Jabalia Central Battalion, killed on 31st of October 2020. So, you would think these terrorists should have known their extermination was near, following the mass murder of Israelis. Now, of course, the South African government claimed Pandor did not express support for Hamas attack. Well, I think this guy was more believable than the South African government, even though we all knew he was lying through his teeth.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never.
Also, why did Hamas themselves claim Pandor, a convert to Islam, congratulated them on the success of their operation? And also, why did Durko refuse to release the recording of the transcript? That's telling, isn't it? Critics worldwide argued that the timing and willingness to communicate with a designated terrorist organization sent a strong message. And I have a very simple question I need answered. If there was nothing sinister about Jabba's call with Hamas, why then did the Department of International Relations and Cooperation initially deny the call had even taken place, only to admit to it later? Well, I would say that is telling, isn't it? A piece in the Times of Israel raised the question bluntly. The South African government knowingly collaborated with Hamas ahead of the October 7 attacks. South Africa's strong posture in favor of Hamas and against Israel also strengthens the idea that they are complicit. The South African Jewish Review describes Pandor's actions as aligning South Africa with terrorists, noting a failure to even condemn the attack and her justification of Hamas's actions. Well, we all know that she instead approved of it. There was also an admission that South Africa hosted Hamas activists at conferences and socialized with them. Freaking hell. I mean, can you be clearer than that about who you are in bed with? Photographs were splashed on social media showing ANC Parliamentary Chief Whip Jackson Mthembu cozying up to Mohammed al-Zahar, the leader of the Palestinian delegation and co-founder of Hamas, in the Chief Whip's boardroom inside the old assembly building in Parliament. Well, if the ANC wanted to shake the label of terrorist organization that President Reagan had stuck on their foreheads, I would say knuckleheads like Jackson Mthembu was doing a pretty crappy job of disproving it. So, taken together, these facts create three broad lines of logic supporting the probability that South Africa had prior knowledge. South Africa has been consistently aligned with Hamas or the Palestinian militant wing, and the threshold for sharing or at least tolerance of information is lower. The congratulatory phone call soon after the attack, hosting of Hamas officials, the silence at the time of the attack, these are all telltale signs that South Africa is probably aligned with terrorist states and groups. The fact that credible media platforms are raising the questions, did South Africa know in advance, suggest there's enough smoke to warrant looking for a fire. Okay, so let's address the elephant in the room. If South Africa did know beforehand, what would be the motives? Well, firstly, to support a terrorist ally, Hamas. Secondly, to take a more forceful position on the international stage by accusing Israel of genocide later. Thirdly, to increase South Africa's global profile among non-aligned or pro-Palestinian states by appearing to stand behind a resistance, i.e. terrorism. So, what should be the indicators we should look for? Well, intelligence or leaked reports of communication, of coordination, diplomatic traffic, unexplained meetings around the time of the attack, post-attack behavior that mirrors foreknowledge, like unusually rapid reactions, tailored statements, legal actions built around it. So, my fellow pot stirrers, that's where we'll leave it. With several big questions you should ask yourself. Why would a country that claims neutrality or even humanitarian support behave so overtly aligned with a terrorist group shortly after that group's barbaric attack? Does the timing of diplomatic contact and South Africa's hosting of Hamas make sense if the government truly had no idea of the attack beforehand? Is there a motive for South Africa to be more deeply involved or aware of Hamas's terrorist operations? If you weigh the evidence and the behavior, the question, did South Africa know, moves from being implausible to being probable. In conclusion, we don't yet have irrefutable proof that South Africa assisted in planning the October 7 attack. If only we could strap Jabba the Hutt to a polygraph and ask her directly, we would have the proof. What we can prove is that South Africa's pattern of diplomatic behavior, its strong ties with Hamas, the timing of calls and hosting of Hamas figures, and media speculation all point to the probability that it was more than a Jaffo. That came from the 1982 blockbuster movie Blue Thunder. Everyone who has seen it will know what Jaffo means. So, if you're watching this thinking, yes, they did know, then you're not alone. What do you think? Does the evidence stack up that South Africa had prior knowledge of the October 7 attack? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to hear your take. And if you found this pot-stirring episode compelling, hit like, subscribe, and share so more people can join in the discussion. And if you really like my pot-stirring content, please consider joining as a member. But until next time, keep asking the strong-sucking questions. Till then, cheers.